dancing with the Father, and he passes you over to the Son, and you're dancing.
Yeah.
It's like, hello. Would that have evolved? And so, did disobedience and sin destroy all that? And like I say, basically the question that we started with, we will have different ways of discussing it, looking at it, whatever. I'm firmly convinced that salvation was necessary, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't necessary for God's plan. We still tend to make God into a human being and make him subject to the kinds of things we're subject to, and he's not. He's just not. And so, before the foundation of the world, he has a plan. And the plan is this, that my creation, I'm going to manifest myself in creation. Paul said that all of creation reflects the glory of God. I'm going to manifest myself in creation, so they've got no reason to kind of like be out of touch, so to speak. Manifest myself in creation. Man is going to mess up. And quite frankly, the grief that they're going to bring into their own lives is what causes me to cry. But if you think that this thing called sin eternally separates man from God, and his plan was not going to be accomplished, that is to like make God so small and to make sin so big. And I'm afraid that over the years, the church has done that. They've made sin even bigger than God. That he can't do this and he can't. I mean, they've had people preach messages. He can't look on sin, which is not biblical at all, because they refer to Jesus quoting Psalm 22 on the cross, which is a really bad distortion of what Jesus was actually doing. But the point is that we've made the obstacle so big, and we would even in this room say, so the incarnation, the purpose of the incarnation was to remove the obstacle. My suggestion here this morning is it was absolutely crucial that the obstacle was removed, but it wasn't an obstacle for God at all. It wasn't like, oh my goodness. And some would say, Steve, I think you're missing the point that, God gave his son to remove. That's pretty huge. I'm not missing that at all. I'm just saying the Son and God are so much bigger than what we're looking at. While we're looking at one thing, God's looking at all things work together. And that's what I want you to share. Salvation is a step, of course. But that's not the whole point of the incarnation. John 1 and 2, he repeatedly talks. Let's read a verse that Paul wrote. Ephesians 1:4. Somebody want to just read Ephesians 1:4? That'll help us segue a bit here.
Just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we would be holy and blameless before him in love.
And it's really one of Paul's greatest revelations that he refers to in chapter 2, that I've had this revelation, having a heck of a time trying to really present it in a way that we could get our heads around it. But he's making it clear that there was a choice that was made before the foundation of the world that Dad made. That this was the way it was going to be. But when God says this is the way it's going to be before the foundation of the world, that they will be found holy, blameless, spotless, in me, in love. When he says that, that's the way it's going to be. But what about this? What about, whatever. In fact, I might have said before, I'm reading a bit lately from Karl Barth, who's a bit of a heavyweight. And I like something that he said in his book that he says, with God, it's nevertheless. What about this? What about that? Nevertheless. But look at what man's done, and look at this, and look at that. Yeah, I know. Nevertheless, they will reign with me in glory. I've said it, and that's the way it's going to be. We have a very hard time with that because our brains, we have been so indoctrinated into a thinking that, to be honest with you, is kind of difficult to really support depending on what you're looking to support. If you want to make sin huge, you can go and make it as big as you want. If you want to make God huge, as he is, beyond huge, infiniteless, omnipotent, omniscient. If we want to actually see him, somehow try to see him as God, not as a projection of a human being that's like Superman, but actually God, where it's just like, whoa. I mean, if we go down that road right there, then all the other stuff just becomes like, nevertheless. Anyway, John 1 and 2. John's had this revelation of the glory. He can't talk about it enough. He's the one that records the glory prayer in John 17. He's had this revelation. He knows about glorification. We said this last week, that remember, Jesus takes on a human form and retains it for eternity. That's what Stephen sees in Acts 7 when he's being stoned. He looks up and he sees Jesus in human form. All of our New Testament, except for one, all of our New Testament appearances of Jesus, so to speak, at the end of John's Gospel and Revelation, all of these appearances, he's in human form. He's always in human form. There's something about human form that he retains always. Was it his destination? Always. Was that the point? Always. The incarnation was not like, well, we know that because we got too many scriptures before the foundation of the world, lamb slain for the. We've got too much stuff saying it wasn't like, oh my goodness, man sinned. How are we going to get him back on track? I got it. I'll become a No, this was all decided before. What? As a revelation of his glory. To think, okay, well, we would have received that revelation of his glory without sin. We just can't get away from it, can we? We just can't. We've got to keep making sin the problem. Sin is the problem. Over and over and over. Big problem that still weighs so heavy on people. Every time we miss the mark, so to speak, we're filled with shame and guilt and all this stuff. Whereas if we realized the glory of the relationship that we have with God, yes, we do fail and we fall short. He doesn't. And once we get it through our fat heads that it's not about our failure, it's about his faithfulness.
Hallelujah.
It's looking at it, we just are looking at it from such a wrong perspective. And every time somebody tries to turn us on that carousel to get us back in a right perspective, yeah, but what about, we can't fight enough for sin. We are sin promoters, and it is powerful. You don't understand. Well, I guess I don't. I guess I don't understand actually the way you would like me to understand and the way the enemy of our souls would like us to understand. Because when you become more sin conscious than Savior conscious, then that is where you will walk. God knows. The more you see yourself as a failure, the more you'll fail. The more you call yourself a loser, you'll lose. The list goes on and on. Why? Because you're calling yourself something that actually you're not, and that is where you'll walk. Instead of saying, this day I walk with the Savior, and if I fall, he's going to save me. I walk with the lover of my soul, although I look into my soul and I wonder, he loves me. He loves my soul. He doesn't love the things that come against us, that work against us. He doesn't love those things. But he loves every cell in our body that, by the way, he created. The glorification, Jesus retains the human body. The only place I said that there's only one place where he doesn't appear in human form, and he kind of like doesn't appear at all. It's Paul's road to Damascus, a light shone from heaven, that we know it was Jesus, because he said, Lord, who are you? He said, I'm Jesus. He says, oh. That is like seriously interesting. Unless you're Paul. And Paul knew more about the Old Testament than I'll ever know, probably. And he recognized that there was going to be an aspect of the glory of God that was going to reveal itself in the fullness of time. He knew that. And when he says, I'm Jesus, it's like, oh my God. This is the same glory that John wrote about. We beheld his glory as of the only begotten of the Father. I said that incarnation is an expression of God's glory. Now we got to be careful here. I don't know if there's any of us in the room that want to try to box in God's glory and say God's glory is this and nothing else kind of thing. We had better see that the glory is like this. It's more. The glory of the Lord comes into the temple, ba-boom, everybody hits the floor. The glory of the Lord is the cloud in the wilderness, represented in the cloud. Oh, so it's the cloud. Well, the glory of the Lord in the Old Testament is referred to many different things. The glory of the Lord comes down on Mount Sinai. The glory of the Lord is all over the place. And he's not going to be, it's always something that you can't quite get your head or your heart around totally. We'll get there in a minute. Somebody go to John, the 1st chapter, verse 4. Somebody else go to Hebrews, the 1st chapter, verse 3.
In him was life, and the life was the light of men.
The light and the life. And what does Hebrews 1:3 say?
And he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high.
The radiance of his glory. That's not all the glory. It's the radiance of his glory. There's more. There's more. It's like when John says, we beheld his glory, full of grace. The word became flesh, dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. So is that all there is to glory? Oh, no, 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 no. Those are huge parts. But it's not all of his glory. We agree on that, right? His glory is much bigger. Much bigger. Jesus, the Incarnation, the radiance of his glory, the fullest expression you could ever ask of the nature of God himself. The total nature? No, just a pretty full expression. We're talking about something much, much, much bigger in the Incarnation than just saying Jesus came to die for our sins. Got to start to wonder after a while. See, Jesus is so good, though. That's the whole thing. You know, if somebody reduced whatever amount of years I've got, I don't know what God will give me in this whole thing. I'm 65 now. But if they reduced it down to one moment, as big a moment as it would have been, and that's what my whole life was about. I mean, some people do preach that, you know. You're here for one purpose, and someday you'll discover that. I say, no, life is a purpose, actually. From the time you were born till the time you die, that's your purpose right there. It's one huge journey. And in that journey, there's going to be things that are crucial that I can say only you can do, because that's what I think. And when we start to look at the Incarnation's sole purpose as salvation, in the light of his glory, it starts to become a little bit, I think there's more going on here than I really thought about.